Welcome to the Boone County History and Culture Center's Meet the Author program. I'm David Weber. Today, I'm pleased that we have Keija Parssinen, who is well known to Colombians. She lived here from about 2010 to 2015, about. Her first novel was The Ruins of Us, published in 2012. It was the One Read book in 2013 at the public library. A couple years later, she published The Unraveling of Mercy Louis, which I want to ask you about. I want to thank our sponsors, Simmons Bank, and the staff of the Boone County History and Culture Center for making this possible. So welcome, Keija.
Thank you so much, David. It's great to be here.
I don't know if you will remember, but I was in the Quarry Heights Writers Workshop back in 2011. And I remember two things about you. First, you taught me the word creative nonfiction, which I never heard before, and that is sort of my interest. And then secondly, you were very kind in your comments about my writing and how I could improve. So tell us a little bit, was that correct that you left Columbia in about 2015?
Yes, and I actually moved to Columbia in 2009.
2009, okay.
I just finished grad school, and my husband had gotten a job at the Supreme Court of Missouri. So he was commuting every day to Jeff City, and I'd never been to Missouri before, but I just loved it. I loved Columbia, and I really miss it, actually. And my husband and I talk fondly and often of our little house on Quarry Heights, in the Quarry Heights neighborhood, right on the quarry. We had such great neighbors. You know, there's a great writing community. There's a lot I really miss about Columbia.
And didn't you also teach at the Columbia Independent School for a while?
I didn't teach there, but I did work there. I was doing, I was the director of admissions for them, and that was a great job. I met so many good friends through that school. Yeah, I just have fond memories of Columbia, for sure.
And then you moved to Tulsa for a couple of years?
Moved to Tulsa. We were actually in Tulsa for 4 years. I got a job as an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Tulsa. And that was a great school, a great job. Tulsa is a difficult place. I mean, it's to go from a place like Columbia to Tulsa was a bit of a rough transition for us in multiple ways. It was a much bigger city, which you think would be good on some level, but in fact, like, was really hard to kind of find our niche. And whereas in Columbia, we felt immediately embraced, and it was so easy to meet our neighbors, and a really warm place. Tulsa, a lot of people in Tulsa have been there their whole lives. It's a place people stay. And we really had trouble kind of getting in there and finding our groove and finding our people. Whereas in Columbia, you know, big university town, people coming and going all the time, people are just used to sort of embracing newcomers, which is such a great thing about the spirit of the place. But Tulsa, you know, I will write about Tulsa for a long time, I think. It's one of these complicated places with, you know, it's kind of a wounded place. It's got a lot of history, a lot of really dark history.
Well, I know that it's been in the news quite a bit the last couple of years for the anniversary of the 1921 Wall Street Massacre, I guess it's called, the Black Wall Street.
Yes, the race massacre. It's the 100-year, this marks the 100-year anniversary of that massacre. And, you know, of course, it was the city itself is founded on, you know, native lands, and it's a complicated place. But, you know, those kind of complications are always interesting to write into, you know, like Saudi Arabia is a complicated place, and I'm writing into that all the time, you know.
So one thing that I'm curious about is, when did you actually start working on your second novel, Mercy Louis?
My second novel, I started working on it pretty soon after Ruins had been published. I wrote the draft of that book in about a year. And that's like the fastest I've ever written written a book. And that's definitely like the most commercial of like, now I've finished my third book, and my third book has taken me 5 years to write, and Ruins took me 5 years to write, but Mercy took me a year. And honestly, it was kind of a nice change of pace. From Ruins, I had done so much research, and it was so in my own family's history. And Mercy was just kind of this fun romp that I could, I mean, not fun because it's also kind of dark, but but it was all from my imagination. So it was kind of nice to just.
So how did you learn all the detail? That's what surprises me about a Texas small refinery town, and even it opens with sort of like a 7-Eleven store, right? And I was just I appreciated all the detail of all the texture, I guess. So how did you know that about refinery and even basketball?
Yeah, well, the basketball that came from my life. I played basketball all through high school.
Oh, is that right?
That was my sport. I played other sports too, but that was like the one I loved. And so yeah, it was fun with Mercy Louis to make her a better basketball player than I was. Make her a star, that was a lot of fun to write. And as far as like the details of the refinery town, even though I grew up in Saudi Arabia, I actually spent the first several years of my life in the largest refinery town in the world, which is Ras Tanura. Or it's not the largest town, but it's the largest refinery in the world. So I know that world very well.
Yeah.
And then I'd always been intrigued by that sort of Port Arthur area down near Houston. Like it seems sort of this forgotten industrialized pocket of Texas that, very different from where I grew up in Texas. After we left Saudi, we moved to Austin. And so I spent middle and high school years in Austin. And that's where I played basketball. And so I know Texas basketball very well, girls sports. So that was very familiar and easy to write for me. And yeah, but the refinery world, I went down there for a few weeks, and I lived in Galveston, and I just would drive out to these like refinery towns that were not very pleasant places. I mean, you wouldn't want to get a little cottage in Port Arthur, like the air like smells of chemicals, and it's just an ugly town. These are beat down places where they've just been over industrialized and forgotten. But I was very interested in the people who live there, because of course there are lots of people who do. And I had friends who had come from there, like whose grandparents still lived in that area. My favorite English teacher, her partner grew up in Port Arthur and knew that world really well. So I actually was in touch with him quite a bit about the book, just for authenticating details. He came from a big Cajun family. So that was really fun. It had always seemed like its own cultural pocket down there, because it shares much more in common with like South Louisiana than with Austin, say. And I love South Louisiana. I taught at LSU for a while.
Is that right?
Yeah, I was a visiting professor there. That was my first sort of encounter with academia, and I really enjoyed it. And just, that was right around the time Mercy was about to come out. And so it was just kind of perfect. It was that whole milieu with that Cajun culture. And so, yeah, it just felt serendipitous.
So you said that you have finished your third novel?
I have, at long last.
Where is it set?
So it is set, it's a Saudi based book. It's a book about Aramco and the big oil company that my grandfather and my father both worked for. And it's basically taking a look, it's examining the Saudi-American relationship through the eyes of the employees of Aramco, both Saudi and American, and their children. And so trying to sort of unpack the geopolitics of that relationship through these interpersonal connections. So it's been a lot of fun to write this book. It's been like years of research, lots of interviewing of family friends, and just conjuring this world of Aramco in the 50s, which is when my grandparents were living there during the first oil boom. And when my mom was like about 4 years old, when they moved there,
Oh,
has
that's
just been
right.
fascinating.
Mm,
And the book,
mm,
so the book also is set partly in Lebanon, it's set partly in the UK,
mm,
set partly in Texas. Like it's kind of a global novel, if you will. But I mean, that's
mm,
also, it's a novel about globalization, about sort of imperialism, American capitalistic imperialism, if you will.
mm,
So
mm,
it has
mm.
lots of tentacles.
Yeah. So, what was your first published piece of work? Was it Saudi Arabia? Was it cultural like this? Or I'm sort of surprised that your themes are so consistent.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that happens for a lot of writers, you know. A lot of writers, they write the places they grew up. They write,
Mm,
they
mm.
can't quite get away from those stories. You know, Philip Roth was always writing New Jersey.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
you know, like
Huh,
we are the places where we grow up. And Saudi Arabia, you know, I was born
huh,
there. I lived there till I was
huh,
about 12. My
mm,
mother grew up there. You know, I have this deep family connection there. And so and it's such a
mm,
weird childhood. Like,
mm,
it's not even the regular expat childhood where, like, if you grow up as an expat in Paris, you're just like in Paris and you speak French. No, I grew up on this little Americanized enclave, like a
right?
suburb.
Yeah.
You know, so writing into that weirdness, I used to think that was too boring to write about. I just grew up
Huh,
in a suburb. Like, what's interesting about that? And now I'm like, it was an American suburb in the Saudi desert. That is definitely weird. And it's always good to write into the
huh,
weirdness. So,
huh.
so yeah, I definitely, I think I'll continue to write about Saudi Arabia for a while.
Huh, huh. So, did you write some short stories or some class pieces in high school or college about
You know,
Saudi?
I definitely, I remember in seventh grade, I wrote a novel in seventh grade about Saudi Arabia, but it was
Uh-huh.
about like a Bedouin girl and
Mm,
gets lost in a shamal and
mm,
very
mm,
dramatic, melodramatic,
mm,
and terrible. But you know,
mm,
so and then in high school, I took a little creative writing class that I loved, and I wrote a little essay about this town of Qatif, which was this place that we had gone for field trips when I was growing up. It was this beautiful oasis town because I
mm,
grew up in the Eastern Province, which is, you know, the oil producing province.
uh,
And, you know, of course, there's desert, but there's also these amazing oases, the Al
mm,
Hassa oases, and they
mm,
have these beautiful natural springs. And so I remember going to Qatif for the first time and just being like, it felt like the real Saudi Arabia. Like,
mm,
there
mm,
were men baking bread in these
mm,
outdoor ovens, and there were these, you know,
mm.
men picking dates from the palms. It was just like,
Wow. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Uh,
Arabia, like as the romantic imagination would
mm,
conjure it. So I
mm,
was just like, ah.
mm,
So I definitely wrote about that in high school. But then I guess I didn't really think of myself as a fiction writer for a long time. I was
mm.
writing poetry mostly.
Oh,
So my
mm,
first publications were actually poems that I published in college. I published a poem in one of the, you know, Princeton had a few literary magazines, and like I think that was my first
mm,
publication that
huh,
I ever had,
huh,
was that poem. Um, and then yeah, after graduation, published a few more poems, and then but then my dad moved back to Saudi Arabia, and it was like at the height of all this terrorist violence in Saudi Arabia. And he would send these emails, and there was just so much drama in these emails from his daily life there, and I was so scared for him.
mm.
And I was so just trying to, you know, 9/11 had happened. I was trying to figure out what Saudi Arabia was, what my relationship to it
Oh,
was,
yeah. Huh,
and
mm,
also like, is my dad gonna be killed?
yeah.
You
Huh,
know, so I
huh,
started kind of writing about, fictionalizing his experiences because they were just so wild and
mm,
interesting. And so that's where the Ruins of Us
mm, mm,
came from. And I started taking little workshops, and I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and I found this great workshop called the Sackett
mm,
Street Writers Workshop, which Corey
mm.
Graves was totally modeled on.
Ah, I see. Huh,
And my first teacher was Julia Fierro, who was an amazing teacher and mentor to me.
huh.
And so she sort of taught me how to write fiction.
Yeah.
And she and
So, You really have moved around a lot, haven't you? I mean, you probably have lived in, I don't know, 10, 12 different places. I mean, if you throw in Colombia and Texas and Tulsa.
Yeah, it's been a lot of places. It's been a lot of places. But now I feel.
So does that make you, do you miss having a home base, or do you take that with you, sort of?
You know, I do miss having a home base. I think roots are important to me, and I felt very rooted in Saudi Arabia. But then when we left, and I was, couldn't never go back. I thought, well, that's not going to work out. Like, I can't have roots in a place I can never go back to. So,
Yeah.
so then after spending those years in Texas, then Austin really did start to feel like home to me. And in a lot of ways, I would say Austin I still feel very emotionally attached to and connected with Austin. My mom still has a house there.
So where did you go to high school?
I
Austin?
went to high school outside of Austin.
That's what to me, that's the question. I ask people where their home is where did you go to high school?
Yeah, I think that's significant. And I feel really bonded. And, we were living out in the hill country, and it was so beautiful. And this was sort of before it had been really developed. This was Austin in like the early 90s, and through the late 90s, it was so beautiful. So yeah, I'm really attached to that place. I would say that feels like home to me, although I haven't been back in a few years now, and I can never live there because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
And there aren't any academic jobs there. So but I would like to put down roots. I love the village we live in Ohio now. It's just, I don't live in Gambier, which is where Kenyon is, because that's too small of a village.
What is it? It's about an hour north of Columbus?
So yeah, Gambier is about an hour from Columbus.
I've driven past probably, I don't know, I-77 or 71 probably.
Yeah.
So where do you live? In Columbus or halfway between?
We would have loved to live in Columbus, but that just seemed like kind of a long commute. And the issue with schools was, schools were an issue where we could afford, didn't really have great schools. So we actually ended up buying a house in a village called Granville, which is where Denison University is.
Yeah.
And it's about a half hour outside of Columbus, and about a 40-minute drive to Kenyon. And it's just beautiful. It's like right where the sort of plains become like Appalachia. It becomes more like mountainous. And it's just got these hills and these big evergreen trees, and it's very lush, and these old houses. Like the village was settled in 1804. And so it's got all this history. There are several underground railroad houses in the village. So it's just, I just love it. I mean, there's not a lot going on here, but like, it's really beautiful.
But especially with kids in school and stuff, I'm sure it keeps you busy.
Yes, we are very busy with that. And of course, now no one's going anywhere. So like,
exactly.
Doesn't matter where you live.
So you're a professor of creative writing?
Yes.
What do you teach?
So I have mainly been teaching fiction workshops for the last 2 years, advanced and introductory fiction workshops. And it's been wonderful. I'm teaching a novel writing class right now, and the students at Kenyon are exceptional. I just love them. I love teaching. I've always loved teaching, whether it was Corey Heights or when I taught at Iowa, or Tulsa. My students at Tulsa were great, but the Kenyon students are so sharp, and not only are they smart, but they're really talented, which is fun for a teacher to see, like this genuine talent jumping off the page. And so, so it's been a real joy. I love it. We are actually in the process of hiring another fiction writer to come to Kenyon. So the school itself is doing really well. It's financially stable. Whereas one of the reasons I left Tulsa, we didn't like Tulsa. I loved the University of Tulsa and my job, but not the place.
Not to live it, yeah.
And so the university was really having financial problems, and there was talk of like, there was a lot of fear about what the future was going to hold, and it was being radically re-envisioned as like a professional super college, which we all know that kind of mumbo jumbo means the arts are going to go like right out the window at the next turn. So I thought, well, I better get out of here. I better go someplace where the arts are valued. And so Kenyon made a lot of sense.
So are you involved with the Kenyon Review?
I am.
Is that the literary journal? Yeah.
I am. Yeah.
And what do you do? I mean, do you reject people's work? Is that your job?
When you put it that way, that is my primary job. Like, I've read a few things that I've loved, and I've passed them on to other editors, and they've liked them too. But they have to be very strict. Like, if it were up to me, I would be taking 60 more things, but it's not up to me. So I am like, I'm one of those slush readers for Kenyon Review. So that's been the quality of the slush for Kenyon Review is incredible. Like, people are so talented. It's very humbling to read these stories that are coming in. And then, it's a wonderful journal, and it's so well run. The people, I've loved being part of that community, like the editors, the people who run their events. They're these people who love literature. They're not academics, they're writers, they're editors. It's a different little pocket from the English department where I live.
So can you write and teach and edit all at the same time? I mean, how do you organize your day and your mind to do those different tasks?
I don't even know. My mind is not organized, David. My mind is not organized at all. My teaching schedule, like, this, you've taught for years. It just sort of forces this kind of,
it structures your day
schedule on you, which is kind of nice. I've loved my teaching, especially during the pandemic when there's no social interaction. It's been great to teach, and I do it all on Google Meet, which is a drag, but my students are great.
Okay.
So I had the option to teach in person this semester, but I thought, the vaccines are coming. I'm just going to wait one more semester. The plan is for us to go in person for the fall. So we'll see. But as far as like time management, I do find time to write. Like, I have Wednesdays and Fridays where I don't teach at all. So those are my days where, like, I do my writing in the morning, I do my yoga. But I've been able to find time to write even on mornings when I teach, just because I am teaching classes that are workshop classes that, I've taught before, this style of class. So it's not like I have to do a ton of prep. I do my prep in the evenings so that in the morning I can use my brain when my brain is functioning. Actually write. I am actually getting to write. It's just, it's slow going. Everything's at a turtle's pace.
What I guess I find that some structure is good, but like too many reports or too many meetings are sort of an interruption to what my mind wants to be doing.
Totally. Yeah, the meetings are a real drag. If I could just teach and write, I'd be golden. But it's like all the other stuff.
So what about students of today? With all the technology and the electronic stuff, tweeting. I use Facebook and the internet, I guess, but I don't tweet. But our students, is the attention span shorter? Can you convince them to make an investment into longer projects?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think their attention spans are shorter. I think all of ours are shorter, and we have to resist that fragmentation, and we have to resist that. I have to resist it. Like, I have to take a moment, after I'm done teaching, or I'm looking at the screen for an hour or sometimes 3 hours for a seminar. I close my screen, I go on a walk, I meditate, I do yoga, someplace where it's like my brain just has a bath of like silence, where I don't have to like look at a screen. And I actually think that the pandemic, all the Zooming that students are having to do, I wonder if it's actually making them less inclined to sit and like doom scroll on their phones when they have off time. I'd be curious. I might actually ask them in class, because they're all so weary. They're sick of screens.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I imagine they're actually spending less time. I could be wrong,
Mm, mm,
but
mm,
no, I find my students are kind of old fashioned in some ways.
mm,
Like they still love to read.
mm,
They love to write. And
mm,
I do tell them like, writing is a meditative practice. Like you have to have focus. So, if you can write longhand where your computer is on the other side of the room from you, that's probably going to be better for your focus. So find ways that you can not be clicking over to your email every few minutes because you won't ever
mm,
be able to get the rhythm of
yeah.
the story or get into the groove. Because,
Mm,
like writing is
mm,
such a
mm,
momentum thing. It's like you got to hit
mm,
your stride, but if you're constantly letting yourself get interrupted,
yeah.
and
Mm,
they know that,
mm,
they really
mm,
know that, and
mm,
they understand that intuitively. But I love it. I mean, my students are so cool. They're like reading Sebald, they're reading Jeffrey Eugenides. I mean, they're reading like amazing
mm.
contemporary fiction. So yeah, I feel really fortunate. Like
Mm,
I feel like the kids are all right,
mm. So, do you think there'll be new media or new outlets instead of bound books? I mean, and there's audio books, I know, but
Yeah, audiobooks are
yeah,
great.
yeah.
And I have no quibbles with audiobooks. I think they're a lot of fun, and especially on my commute up to Kenyon, I listen to them
That's
myself.
it.
I do a lot of
Yeah.
nonfiction on audiobooks going up to Kenyon,
Mm,
back when I used to drive to campus.
mm, mm.
But like no, I actually don't think there was a moment about, I guess maybe 10 years ago, when ebooks were accounting for like a massive percentage of
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
sales, and people
Yeah.
really panicked. They were like, books, that's it, books are gone, like they're over. And they're not at all. And bookstores are really thriving. Like people are resisting Amazon, they're resisting just people want a book in their hands. They don't,
Yeah.
our eyes are tired, like I said, from screens all day. So if we don't want to look, we want an old technology, not a new technology for our
Mm,
books,
mm, mm,
I
mm,
feel. I think
mm,
that there will
mm,
always
mm.
be bound books. I just
Yeah.
feel like it's such you can't beat it as far as like a rugged, useful, beloved technology, really.
Yeah. So let me go back to your experience in Colombia with One Read and the ruins of us. So did you before One Read, did you have a sense of who your readers were, and did One Read change that? I mean,
It's so funny. I remember actually another one of my favorite Columbia writers who you may have had on your program already, Ibtisam Barakat. Do you know her? Ibtisam? She's a
no.
Palestinian writer. She's
I'll email you and ask for her address.
I've got her books over here. I'm going to grab one of her
Yeah.
books.
Yeah. I
So
appreciate
she's
it.
one of my favorite Columbia writers. She
No.
has written about her Palestinian childhood really beautifully. And I actually brought her to Tulsa. And there's her inscription in the book. I forgot.
Oh.
She's amazing. But
Huh.
yeah, she came to Tulsa and gave a talk. But I remember her asking me one time during the one read, she was like, so who do you envision as your audience for your
Yeah.
books?
Huh.
And I just don't.
Really?
I want
Huh.
anyone who picks up my book to be able to enjoy it. I don't have a specific person in mind.
Yeah.
I'm not writing, like I have sent my current novel, I've sent it to Saudi readers, I've sent it to Syrian readers, I've sent it to Americans, Brits, like, just I want everyone to be able to enjoy it. To me, that's what a successful work of literature
Hmm.
does, is it sort of breaks these boundaries. And so yeah, I don't really have anyone in mind. I'm kind of useless on that question.
Huh. Huh. No, I've often wondered that, like who, do people acquire a following or whatever who they, always see,
I think some people,
yeah.
I definitely think some
Huh.
people do. If you write into a certain genre, or like you're writing in a certain way, or I don't know. I mean, I think you'll acquire a following. You may not set out to have that
Yeah.
following,
Yeah. That's a good way to
but
put
I
it. Yeah.
think I'm kind of all over the map, like with my writing. So
Yeah,
I don't think if they were following me, they'd just be zigging and zagging all over the place.
yeah, yeah. So I'm sure you're still working on your third novel, right? It's not totally finished, is it?
It's not.
I mean, yeah,
I'm on like, gosh, I'm up to like maybe my 5th draft now.
that's,
So
oh, wow. Huh.
it's, yeah, it's like, but I'm doing actually, this is amazing advice I just got about revision, and it comes from George Saunders. And I happened to meet him in Tulsa, and now we're like email buddies, which means I email him, he's not emailing me, hey, Gail, what's
That's
up?
right.
But I'm like, hi, George.
Huh.
So every once in a while, I try not to heckle him or pester him, but I wrote him recently, and it was just asking him about revision. And he said that what he does with his revisions when he's not happy with where something is, or it's not quite right yet, he does what he calls shrink wrapping, which means he tries to radically cut it down by like 20%. And then he said, because I feel that a story told 20% faster is going to be a better story. And so he calls that shrink wrapping. And I was like, that is fascinating, because I do feel like my novel is like a little bloated. Like it's almost 500 pages for one thing. And so, and he said he tries to imagine like a really impatient reader, like somebody who's just like, like maybe a New York City editor, for instance. And he's like, and so I try to write with them in mind and thinking, all right, well, try to get bored with this jerk, that's, and I thought that's so hilarious. And that's probably a really good technique to remember your reader and to think, well, I may think all this is necessary, but it is some stranger in New York City in, a publishing house going to think it's that necessary? So yeah, so I think my next draft is going to be about shrink wrapping my novel. Try to put it on a diet, get it down to about maybe 400 pages or so. We'll see.
10% less or something. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to think. Let's see what else. No, I think that's all I have. Is there anything else I should ask you before I thank you?
This has been great. This has been so much fun.
Yeah.
I just want to say hi to all my Columbia friends and all my writer pals, and the old Quarry Heights community. Was such a joy.
Thank you for talking to us today, Keija.
It's been so much fun. Thank you, David.